Welcome everyone to the course of international business. We will continue from where we left in the last lecture. So, in the last lecture we were talking about the political effect and legal effect in any country on the business firms. So, there we discussed about what is the political climate and what are the types of democracy, and in there we discussed about the basically a direct democracy, and then we talked about a representative democracy. So, then we talked about the types of thought processes in any country, for example, a communist view or a socialist view or a capitalist view. So, what kind of a view the country has, right, that also affects. For example, when it is a communist view, it is like largely dictated, and when it is a capitalist view, there is a high individual freedom, and when it is a socialist view, it is in between, right. So, from there we move on today to the fundamental elements of the democratic political systems. Okay. So, as it says, there is a freedom of opinion, press, religion, association and access to information. So, when in a good democracy, right, there is always a freedom of opinion. For example, the US, for example, if you look at the US, now in the US the press is so powerful that it even does not mind making the president of the country uncomfortable, right. It during any elections, if we see, they ask such tough questions that it would make anybody shake up anybody, right. So, then exercise of the citizen power and civic responsibility either directly or through the elected representatives, right, either directly, as I said, in the direct democracy, or through the representatives in a representative democracy. So, the citizens exercise their power. So, citizens equality in opportunity and treatment before everybody is same, right. There is a free, fair and regular election. So, the election is one of the most important parameters of a democracy. A free and regular election is expected in a good democracy. The majority rule coupled with protection of individual and majority rights. So, what is it says that whatever the majority says, that is correct, right, in a democracy, but that does not mean the majority can trample over the individual's right. So, that is not allowed. So, there is a freedom of, there is something is accepted whatever the majority says, but still an individual cannot be tortured, right. Fair and independent court system is also there, right, with protecting the rights and property of the individuals. Subordination of the government to the rule of law. So, the rule of law is so high that even the government has to abide to those rules of law, and they cannot be above it. So, this is the fundamental, the science of a good democracy. Now, if you look at this diagram, there are two things that are important, that we talk about. What are the critical influences, right, on a democratic system, and what are the essential elements, right. So, if we start from the, let us say, from within. So, what it says, the essential elements is first civic participation. So, how much people are participating, what is how the media or the news is playing its role, right. What is the role of the civil society, how the civil society is playing its role. For example, I would like to say that India is moving now, there is a transition is happening at the moment, that earlier we were not bothered about cleanliness. So, after this new public initiative which has started, Swachh Bharat in India, people are now moving towards understanding the impact of cleanliness and its impact on others in a country. So, how the civil society is working, right, how the government institutions are working, how effectively they are working for the people. Again, here we have a lot of weakness. For example, there is a lot of corruption in the Indian institutions, right. So, that is not fair, that is not good for the democracy. How the elections are being held, are the elections, is there any rigging in the elections. So, earlier days in India, when there was a ballot system, at that time the papers format, when we were doing, at that time there was cases of booth rigging and all. So, hijacking the entire booth. So, this was something which is against the spirit of democracy, but now we are improving upon it, right. So, we are in a transition phase, India is in a transition phase, US is much developed in case of these rules and essential elements, how their civic participation is there, the news is supporting, media is supporting them and all, they are much ahead of us. And finally, rule of law and civil rights. So, these are some of the things which are the essential elements. And what influences these essential elements? For example, the demographics. What kind of demographics the country has? What is the geopolitical situation, right? So, for example, who are your neighboring countries, what are your relationships with them and all. What are the different interest groups who are involved, the NGO, large NGOs and all, right, who are and the even the bodies, institutions, the political norm and the culture of the country, right. How security, how much security is there from an external and internal point of view, what is the role of technology, and finally, the economics and the well-being, right. So, these are some of the factors which influence the which have a critical influence on the essential elements, right. And with this together, the essential elements and the critical influencers, the democratic political system of any country can be considered to be good or not good. Okay. Now, freedom in the world. So, what is this? Is an annual global report on political rights and civil liberties, and it is composed of ratings and descriptive text for each country and some territories. So, the 2019 edition, which took about 195 countries and 14 territories, right, has given some feedback, okay, what kind of freedom is there in the world, right, in different countries. So, how they have distributed it? On basis of political rights, there are 0 to 40 points, and they have again subdivided it, that electoral process is 0 to 12 points, the political pluralism and participation is 0 to 16 points, functioning of the government is given 0 to 12 points. So, this comprises 16 plus 12, 28 plus 12, 40, right. So, 0 to 40. The remaining 60 points is given for civil liberties. Now, how much freedom of expression and belief is there? 0 to 16 points. Association and organizational rights 12 points, rule of the law 16 points, personal autonomy 16 points. So, on basis of these, they have created some indices and some ratings. Okay. Now, if you can see here, for example, we have for Canada, out of 100 it gets a score of 99, which is very high, very good. Denmark 97, Sweden 100 on 100. So, in terms of the freedom, Sweden is 100 on 100, Finland 100 on 100, right. Then USA 86 and Australia 98. But when you come to some of the other countries, for example, if you can see, some of them have a score of 75, India is 75, which is good enough, right, good, but not very good. Obviously, I would say when it comes to freedom, it is a very important thing, but still it is good. But when you look at some of the other values like 20, right, 11, 9, 18, right, they are not very encouraging, they are not very encouraging, right. So, what it says, if you look at this, so the diagrams are free, completely or largely free is green, all these are green showing are the free countries, partly free are the yellow ones, right, and not free at all are the blue ones. Okay. So, India comes in the free one at least, right. So, completely free countries, there are 86 countries and 1 territory, partly free there are 59 countries and 5 territories, and not free is still 50 countries, okay, which is a substantial number, okay, out of this 195 and 14. Okay. Now, the worst of the worst, some of the worst countries have been like Syria, which got a score of 0, Sudan 2. So, these are some of the scores like Somalia 7, right, Libya 9, and India has got a score of 75, as we mentioned, as we discussed, right. So, freedom rating, India has got 2.517 to 7, political rights, so civil liberties. So, these scores are all telling us that India is still in a good shape, there is a political freedom, but this changes, obviously this changes. Now, we talk about what is totalitarianism, right. So, here there is a restriction on the decision making to a few individuals only, right. So, in this system, a single agent, whether an individual or a group of party, monopolize the political power and try to mobilize the population. So, there is a monopoly, right. So, for example, North Korea has a monopoly, the ruler has a monopoly, right. So, that is why the total power is with him, that is why totalitarianism. Okay. A condition that forcibly merges the interest of individuals with those of the state, sorry. For example, China's one child policy was forced upon the people, right. So, some of the types of this are authoritarianism, which is a part of it, does not tolerate deviation from the state ideology. There is no tolerance, very little tolerance. Reflects an unquestioning obedience to the state authority, and restriction usually incurs severe punishment. North Korea. I came to know about one interesting fact about North Korea, that even North Korea government does not allow people to choose their dress also. So, there is only a stipulated number of kinds of color and dress fabric which they can wear. So, there is almost 9 to 10 something like that, and they cannot choose anything else. So, this kind of which is unbelievable for a person like me in India. Fascism, controlling the people's mind and soul as well as their daily lives. So, a good example of fascism was when we hear this word is we remember Mussolini, we remember Hitler, right. So, these are the people who were practicing this. Secular totalitarianism, it grants individuals freedoms only so long as ensuring activities threaten neither social stability nor the political power. So, till you are not a threat, so that time till that time you are given freedom, right. China, Singapore, Vietnam example. Some people even advocate that there should be some kind of totalitarianism. So, they say China whatever is happening is not wrong, because they feel when it comes when too much of power is given to people, people tend to misutilize. So, that is the kind of argument people make, but although I do not support it. Theocratic totalitarianism says religious leaders like Taliban party in Afghanistan, foundations of the political institution of Afghanistan being based on Islamic Sharia law, right. The Vatican City with an absolute theocratic elective monarchy that is guided by the principles of a Christian religious school of thought. The Pope is the supreme power in the country and leads the executive, legislative and judicial branches of the Vatican government. So, when religious leaders take up, so it is called a theocratic, right. Now, coming to trends in the political systems, the past few decades have witnessed the spread of democracy and a decline in totalitarianism. So, very little we find nowadays, right. So, the acceptance of principle of democracy, that means giving more power to the people, right, and their expression in the freer market has been a major reason of growth in international business. So, international business is growing, but still we saw that there are still about 50 countries where the freedom is very low, right. And if these countries could also evolve, then the freedom, the business would be still much better, right. What is this third wave of democracy? This emerged systems based on individual freedoms and civil liberties and boasting fair civic institutions, more active media, objective judiciaries and stronger property rights. During 1970s to 80s, countries from Africa, Asia, Latin America, South America and Eastern Europe abandoned the totalitarian systems, right. But still we are plagued by several poor policies and policy and rules in some of these countries and continents, right. The engines of democracy, the failure of totalitarian regimes to deliver economic progress was the first reason why democracy came into place in many of the countries. Improved communication technology, economic dividends of increasing political freedom. So, these countries found that instead of staying having a one person's rule, for example, we talk about Libya, we talk about Syria. So, when you talk about these countries, they found that economic dividends are more when you are having a more political freedom, right. But there are political risks also, and what are the political risks? In fact, you will be you should know that when the when a country goes for a loan, for example, let us say the IMF or anywhere. So, the kind of loan is being given, the interest rate being charged on the country depends, one of the important factors is the political freedom of this country, right. The stability, political stability and political freedom, right. The risk that political decisions, events or conditions in a country negatively affect the profitability or sustainability of an investment is called political risk. So, is the risk that an investment's return could suffer as a result of political changes or instability in a country. Instability affecting investment returns could stem from a change in government, legislative bodies and other foreign policy makers or the military control, right. So, such changes can be disastrous. You see this example, anti-American protesters in Pakistan burned a McDonald's restaurant. So, it is not about burning one shop or one unit, it is about the kind of fear you instill in the other businesses, business firms, right. Shell gas station and a KFC restaurant due to US bombing in Afghanistan in October 2001 similarly. The primary types of political risks are systemic, implementation of a new rule by the current government or newly elected government, right. So, this is a systemic political risk. Procedural, corruption can raise the cost of business. So, although I feel bad to say that, but still India is one of the corrupt countries, right. Although we are not as bad as some of the other countries, but still there is a lot to improve in terms of corruption, freeing from corruption. Distributive, imposing high tax rates, right, and finally catastrophic, which arise due to political disorder or war, right. So, these are the types of political risks which emerges on basis of these 4 conditions. So, internal political risk can arise within a country or from outside. Okay. Factors which can destabilize a government, to which authoritarian governments are particularly vulnerable. For example, if there is a single leader and people are fed up and they are now revolting. So, it has happened in Romania, it had happened in Libya, in several places, right. Because of the corruption, personalized power centers, factional infighting, infighting between the parties in the members of the party, institutional power bases such as the army. So, these are the some of the internal political risks. Now, if you see internal political risks, what are the different forms, what are the effects? Fragmented political allegiances, weak elements of civil society, presence of groups who feel alienated, risk of terrorist attack is there, right. This, the terrorists are attacking the people, breaking the destroying the infrastructure. Fragile coalition government is one also is a risk that leads to internal political risks. Conflicting factions within the government. So, within the government there is a lot of disturbance, one person trying to not to listen to the head, maybe everybody wants to rise to the power. Personalized power centers, this is what I meant. Actual and potential social unrest. So, social unrest can happen because of some cultural issue, some new rules have been framed by the government which the people feel is an is their right, and the government is trying to curb their rights. So, for example, it happened in India when Supreme Court banned bullfighting, but then they were not successful, right. So, this was a case where they had to go back to their old rules, right. So, this kind of things can be dangerous, right. Transparency International's corruption perception index. So, the top countries in this are Denmark and New Zealand with scores of 88 and 87 respectively. The bottom countries are Somalia, Syria, South Sudan with 10, 13 kind of score. A scale of 0 to 100, right, where 0 is highly corrupt and 100 is very clean, right. So, this is what you can see, some like Denmark gets 88, New Zealand 87, Finland 85, Singapore 85, Sweden 85, and when you come to North Korea 14, Somalia for 10. So, Transparency International has made this corruption perception index, how corrupted these countries are, and this helps the firms, the business firms to decide whether they should enter into this market or not. If they want to enter into the market, what should be the right way to enter into the market, for how long they should enter, think of making their strategies and everything, right. When we come to the international political risks, it talks about insecurity in relations between the countries which create uncertainties in the and affect the international business. So, the relationship between the countries, for example, recently there was a very serious tension between India and China. So, both parties had started pushing their armies towards making their armies ready, and that sign was not a very good sign. So, that affected the business climate also. Recently India and Pakistan, right. Countries differ in the relative power in economic, political and military respects, and their businesses often reflect these strengths and weaknesses. Regional and cross border conflicts give rise to risk in many parts of the world, especially affecting operations in resource rich countries. Recently you must have heard about the relationship between Mexico and USA, right. So, even President Trump did not feel wrong in saying that they would create a wall to dissuade the people to enter into USA, right. Unstable locations and uncertain environments, right, MNEs must assess risks and the multinational, basically MNEs are the multinationals, right, must assess risks and work with the stakeholders. So, when there is an international political risk, now let us look at what factors are affecting the international risks: insecure borders, military invasion, threat of terrorism, global imbalances in the international trade, dispute with the trading partners, spillover of regional conflict. So, there is the spillover from the region to the maybe center, disputes with neighboring countries, insecurity of energy and natural resources, and as I said, insecure borders. So, these are some of the international risks. Now, this table talks about macro political and micro political risks. Now, when it comes to macro, the larger perspective, and micro is the smaller. So, macro political risks will affect all firms in the same general way. Micro political risk tends to affect selected sectors of the economy and or specific foreign companies, and is often driven by the dominance of those firms. Example, I would explain what is expropriation, right. The seizure of private business with little or no compensation, right. So, is one of the major political risks. There are others also, for example, confiscation, domestication and expropriation is one of them, which I will explain in the maybe the next slide. So, expropriation, what happens, the seizure of the private properties happen, businesses happen with some compensation is being given to them or maybe very little. In 2001, Iraq war caused to increase price of oil and severely affected the airline industry. Air Canada filed for bankruptcy and is cutting this amount of work jobs from its workforce, and United Airlines in February the company lost 367 million, and this is all. So, these are kind of macro political, because of the Iraq war in 2001 this kind of tensions happened in those times, right. In micro political risk, what happens, this risks often take the form of industry regulation. So, the government maybe for example, today only I was reading. So, the companies like ITC, which is largely where cigarette is one of the major contributors, the government's new rule that is going to come in very shortly would be hampering the business of ITC largely, right. So, they are going to increase the tax for these kind of this is a sin product, because alcohol, cigarettes are all called sin products. So, for these kind of products they are going to increase the tax further. So, this is an internal regulation that has happened within the country, and this is going to affect the business. In Maldives example, 2007 changed the foreign labor regulation, indicating that all foreign labor such as drivers, waiters and divers must be replaced by local Maldivians. Now, similarly it has happened in US also, it had happened in India also, but I can say positively in India one was that was not a risk, it was a good situation where our labor laws were amended, and which helped the companies to set up and be more flexible in handling their workforce, right. But here we are talking about political risks. So, the Indian example is a positive thing. Here this we are talking about the localization of the workforce. Even when Trump came to power, his major agenda was to stop outsourcing and give jobs to the local people in America. So, that is how he won, and that is a risk, right, risk to the not only the Indian businesses, but it is a risk to the businesses in America itself, because these businesses now have to hire people, the local people at a much higher cost, and that is not economically good for them. So, these are three types of risks which I was talking about: confiscation, seizing of a company's assets without payment. So, this happened during the time in Iran. So, when Iran Ayatollah Khomeini came to power, he seized some of the businesses, international businesses, and he took their assets, right. Expropriation is again some reimbursement for the assets is made. It happened in India also in 50s and 60s. When Shell company came to India, the Indian government did not want that the oil should be controlled by the foreign firms. So, they expropriated these industries, right. Last is domestication. The government mandates local ownership. For example, Hero Honda, Maruti Suzuki are examples of that. So, there are economic risks right. So, the economic risks are, for example, is as we understand, the even there is a maybe the whole business, there is a chance that it might not exist, it might not survive anymore, or if it all it survives, then the profitability of the firm becomes a challenge. Price controls are some of the political risks that happens because of the political climate. So, the government makes this price controls, the changes, and for example, they increase the import duties for they give subsidies to the government, the local players. So, these kind of situations also plays a risk. So, these are some of the impacts of the political risk you can see. This may be our last slide for the day. So, when it comes to expropriation or confiscation, there is a loss of sales, future profits are gone, and there is a campaign against foreign goods, for example. So, this is a political risk. Again you see these are some increased cost of public relations campaigns to improve public image, right, when there is a foreign good against the foreign good. For example, when Ramdev Baba Ramdev Patanjali talked against the foreign goods. He says ki why should people buy a product from Hindustan Unilever, for example, and they should buy only the desi or the swadeshi or the local goods, then it is the money stays in India. So, these kind of statements now are very damaging for sometimes business, because these companies now have to spend extra money to improve their image, because then they are felt like they are some outsiders who are snatching our money. Mandatory labor benefit legislation, so it increases the operating costs. Now, if you make a law okay, this much of money is to be minimum given, so this kind of laws also can increase the cost of the businesses. These are found in countries like Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, African countries. Kidnapping, terrorist is there in many other countries also, but very little. So, disrupted production, increased security cost and all this, lower productivity. Civil wars is a serious type of political risk, where there is a destruction of property, disruption of production, lower productivity, etc. Currency devaluation, reduced value of the repatriated earnings. So, what happens? So, because of currency devaluation, the local industries gain, because the local currency becomes cheaper. So, more people can buy from outside a large amount of things at a very nominal or cheap at a lower cost. But there is still it is bad for some of the businesses who are doing this, are trying to sell their products in the country, right. So, currency re-evaluation, increased taxations. So, these are some of the political risks that happens, and for any business firms, and all business firms have to be very careful when they are looking into these things. So, understanding the business climate of a country is one of the most important issues that any manager of an international business has to look into, because the hard earnings, the huge capital investments can become an absolute zero, or it can fall badly just because of a change in the political climate. So, firms and business managers need to understand how political risks or political influences can affect their business at large. So, this is all we have for the day. Thank you very much. We will meet in the next lecture. Thank you so much.